Okay. Just getting set up. I'll make sure I've got everything in place. Hi, YouTube. You get the early version of me. While we wait for Instagram to hop on. Okay. Make sure I can still access my notes. Okay. Awesome. This has been a while coming. I'm sorry it has taken so long, but I'm excited to finally get to do this. My hope and intention is that you'll be able to get some insight out of this that will speak to you and help you see some of the things that I see. The women's session was powerful for me. I know there was a lot of hurt, a lot of frustration, a lot of anger about a lot of things that were said. I'm going to help give you some context so that you can understand your personal experience, but also understand kind of on the grander scale what some of the things that were being said I think had potential meaning for them. The first thing I want to do right off the bat, though, before we really dive in, is putting my disclaimer out there, right? Anytime I am sharing anything with you that has to do with the church or the gospel, it is simply my interpretations, opinions, and perspectives. I never speak for the church. I'm not a representative of the church. I'm not defining doctrine or anything like that, right? All of my work is based in looking at patterns and understanding what are the different relationships from those patterns and how might we interpret that. I share a lot of my experiences, my insights, my thoughts and perspectives on things because it's what's been helpful for me in my life, and I've seen how it's helpful for other people. That's my purpose and intent in anything and everything that I share and do. Same with this video, especially with this video. So keep that in mind. Before we dive in further, though, into the actual talks and things that were said, I want to give us a little bit of background in case this is the first time you have ever watched any of my stuff, to just kind of make sure we're all on the same page. Okay? First thing we need to understand is the staircase model. Right? This is a model I created. Basically defines how we interact in a relationship. Any kind of relationship, right? A relationship with ourselves, relationship with God, relationship with other people, relationship between organizations, businesses, the church, right? And what's important to note about this is there's two different parties, right? One party I have represented here by the gold. I typically call this the masculine energy. And the other party is represented here by the silver, what I call feminine energy. Now, when I'm referring to masculine and feminine energy, it's important to note, I'm not talking about gender or personality. I am talking about two types of traits, qualities, right? A collection of them. Masculine is action-oriented, directive, physical, external. Feminine is fluid, flowing, creative, connective, internal, spiritual. Okay, so you will be seeing those different patterns play out. All of us have masculine and feminine energies within us. In other words, we use all of those traits, right? And it's our job to learn how to balance both of those, as well as to balance them in relationships that we are a part of, right? We kind of sometimes take turns playing those different roles. And again, men and women, we tend to lead or be dominant with one of these energies. But that doesn't have to correlate to gender, but it often does, because part of where we get our stereotypes about men and women comes from these feminine and masculine energies. So in our conversation, when I'm referring to the model, I may be saying he or she. Oftentimes, I'm simply referring to the feminine energy or the masculine energy. We'll see how our conversation goes today. I may be referring to women of the church and brethren, right? So we might get a little bit of that going on. But I wanted to give you that heads up first. The next piece you need to know is understand that there are 4 different stages that take place here, okay? This first phase is what I call the divine departure, right? You'll see this feminine is just barely starting to wake up a little bit, start to get some awareness of like, ooh, there's something new, we want to go, right? Feminine energy is always about expansion and abundance and next levels of growth and progression. Before every divine departure, there was a stable period. So another way to look at this, you'll notice it just repeats over and over and over. Ignore, these are notes from a previous thing I did. There we go. So right here where we have a divine departure poking out, right before it was this stable set point, right? And so things were stable, smooth, good, like we feel like we've got our feet underneath us. And then we get invited to this divine departure. Now, sometimes that happens because we get this pull inside of us. Sometimes that happens because something external kind of throws us into it, right? It can vary from person to person. But the reason I call it the divine departure is because when we are in the midst of it, it can often feel like we might be leaving or appear as if we're walking away from God or departing from God, right? And in actuality, when we understand this pattern and construct, it is a calling of God pulling us forward into greater depths and levels of relationship. Remember, that is always the whole point here, deeper levels of relationship. So that's the first stage here, okay? The second stage here is what I call the energy clash or the building of the feminine, right? See how this feminine energy is now starting to take up momentum here. But you'll also notice it's getting split with the masculine, okay? So we have this split in the energy, which can be felt as tension and is often experienced by people as such. When you get pulled in that divine departure, there are also people who are not. That's a really important thing. We are not all called on the divine departure at the same time. We need people staying in that older energy in order to create this polarity that helps create the momentum to move us all forward, right? Think about it like shooting a bow and arrow, right? You need the firm, immovable bow, but then you also need the string that is flexible, that can move in order to create that momentum to shoot us forward. Okay, so that's what happens here. However, we're usually not conscious of the energy clash stage and what's going on there. So when we experience it, we just tend to think the other side is off and doing something wrong. And what will happen is those who are still in the stable point energy will try and pull these people and say, get back in your place. You're stepping out of line. You should be back here. Everything was fine and dandy, right? Because we're in that stable set point before you moved out here. What's going on? Okay? On the flip side, the people here who have had this experience of divine departure and you start seeking out something new and you're now built up this new insight and you're like, wow, I found something really wonderful here. Come join me. I want to share this with you. Look how good this is. Look how amazing. Come on. Right? And that creates this tension between the two, right? Trying to struggle. Where is the place that we should be? Well, the place that you should be is exactly where you are because we need some people here and we need some people here. Okay, so that's that second phase. The third phase here is what I call, this point here, actually, we want to talk about first. This is what I call the decision point or the rise point. This is critical. We have to make a decision at this point in order for the feminine to move into this risen feminine energy here. Okay? This feminine energy is different than the feminine energy here. You'll notice that a swap took place. The masculine was on top and the feminine was on bottom. The feminine is now on top, the masculine is on bottom here. So we do not understand this phase very well, right? Another way to describe this is the calibration phase. And the reason why I like to call it the calibration phase or the building phase is because we still have this split in energy, like in the energy clash, right? We have some of the masculine, some of the feminine. They're not equal yet, like this new set point. We're still kind of, it can appear like we're still in the energy clash stage, when actually we've moved into this risen feminine state. Understanding how this process moves from the energy clash to making the decision to rise to stepping into this risen feminine or calibration stage is really important because again, this can feel like, especially early on, look how little itty bitty of the masculine energy is here, right? And it can feel really frustrating to the feminine to be like, hello, I have this like giant water ball here. Would you come and catch up, right? Because the masculine actually does a flip. The part of how this process happens is the feminine has to push up and rise, do that all on her own. There is no initial support underneath, right? She is stepping into the unknown, trusting that when she does, foot will come there and be there, right? So this phase here actually slowly fills in as the feminine is able to hold this space and has to explicitly invite the masculine in. If those pieces don't happen, the flip doesn't occur, the rise usually inevitably falls because the feminine gets worn out, right, from trying to hold this for a long period of time and not having the masculine flip in. And when that occurs, it's what I call a pimple. So you'll see here, this is where the rise could have happened, but instead we slide back down here. Now, if you stay in this, and part of the reason I call it a pimple is because it looks like a pimple, and pimple experience can range just like a physical pimple on our face or body, from being just like a minor annoyance to something that is painful and difficult, right? But what is happening here is we're actually moving back into the energy clash stage. But we can't go backwards. This axis represents time, so we have to go forward. So that's why it's over here, but it's still in this energy clash stage, right? And so what can happen is we can do this for a while of like attempts to rise over and over, but repeated pimpling. And this is where we get stuck in a spiral and we can't fully rise up. Or the other thing that can happen is we can make a little rise, but it's not sustained very long. And so we get what I call as a quick switch, where we basically move back to this phase again really quickly. And it gives the appearance as if no progress has taken place. Okay, so that's all an important part of this process to understand, right? What happens if we can't rise? Now, a pimple is not an inherently bad thing. Going back into the energy clash stage, the whole point and purpose of the energy clash stage is not to just butt heads for the sake of it, right? Remember, it's creating that polarity, which gives us the momentum necessary for the rise. If we don't spend enough time in that tension state, we don't have enough momentum to be able to make the rise well. So a pimple will naturally occur, moving us back into that energy clash stage so we can help build up some of that momentum again. The way I describe this in our personal experiences is it's an opportunity for us to gain greater clarity, right? There is something we were not yet clear on in our understanding. If we were clear on it, we would be able to hold the rise. Because again, remember, the rise is all about trust, stepping into the unknown, stepping up into something new, and being able to trust that that can be there. Now, trust happens on the individual level for the feminine and for the masculine, but also between them, right? There's this trust that if the feminine rises, the masculine will fill in that space, but also the masculine has to be willing to trust the feminine that she is ready to hold that space. Because what happens when we repeat this cycle is it becomes the masculine's turn to go on this journey of divine departure, energy clash, and rise. Okay. And during this phase, the feminine becomes responsible of this protective space while he goes on this journey. It can appear that this is a very passive experience, right? Very passive here. It is actually not. The masculine, especially in the divine departure, has to do a lot to hold that space and not crush the feminine, right? And going back to our bow analogy, every fiber within the masculine is screaming, don't move. Hold your position, hold your position, hold your position, right? At the same time, everything in the feminine is saying, move, 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 right? And so part of this is the masculine wants to be able to know and trust, hey, if I come and flip here, are you ready and able to hold steady in this space so that when it's time for me to go on my journey here, I can have that confidence that you aren't going to let me down. You're going to allow me to be, or you'll be that support that I need in order for this progression to take place and happen. Okay, so lots of details there, lots of things. That's mainly to give you context, right? Don't feel like you have to remember or know it all right now, but when I'm going to be referring to some of these things, this will help you have a basic understanding of what I'm talking about. Okay? The second thing, though, that we need to understand is what are system level conversations. Okay, we tend to think about when we're in relationship, one individual with another, right? We know how that interaction works. We know that there's spending time together, having conversations, interacting with one another, right? That individual to individual relationship, while we may not always be great at it, we at least understand what that looks like, right? When we tend to look at what does it look like to be in relationship with a system or an organization, we tend to think it looks like an individual and the organization here, and that they're trying to communicate and interact with each other. This often creates the appearance of imbalance, as if we can't communicate here, or that the organization and system has some inherent ability over the individual because it's bigger and there's more, and that the individual has less power. This is not true. Okay? The actual thing that happens is it's not one individual and a group of individuals. It is a group of individuals that we call the people or the members, and a group of people that we call the organization or the leadership. Right? Two groups in relationship with one another. Okay? And the way those groups interact with one another is the conversations that take place between each one contribute to an overall conversation that is had between the two. This overall conversation is what propels and moves things forward through the model, but it's not actually a lot of the words or things that are said, right? It's like the average of all of these underlying pieces, right? Which is why our individual conversations and experiences and relationships that we have with other people within whatever group we're in matter, because they all add up and contribute to that overall conversation. Okay. So another way to think about this is we think it looks like this: individual and an organization. In actuality, we have all these little people, and it is creating this overall conversation. Okay. Part of what I'm going to be doing is we're going to be walking through some of the things that were said in general conference, and I'm going to be pulling things out. I'm going to be saying, look, this corresponds to this part here. I'm going to be saying, look, this is part of the overall conversation that is happening. Okay, so we want to be aware of those things, taking note of that. Okay? The third thing, though, we need to get out of the way before we can really start diving into the conference talks is understanding the influence of your state of being when you are watching it and how that helps determine your experience. Okay? Now, your state of being in my world is made up of two pieces. One, what stage you are in and what phase you are in. And we're not going to go in depth into the different phases. I teach that there's 4 phases. They correspond with the 4 stages. The 4 stages are these 4, right? So divine departure, energy clash, the rise, and the new stable point, right? Depending on which stage you're in, you're going to experience conference differently. Okay. If you have yet to go on a divine departure and you're in like a things are good, I'm fine, right? It's going to be a very different experience than if you are here holding some of this risen feminine and hoping that the masculine is going to start showing up, right? So that's the first thing to take note of. The reason why phases come into play, though, is because, which is different than stages, right? Shifting to the other piece. Our phases kind of help determine the level of trauma and wounding that we're currently operating from and how that affects us. I did a couple of videos that talk about general conference, preparing for it, and navigating your experiences. You can check those out at a different time. But the piece I'm going to say here is if you are in the middle of going through this process, right? One of the requirements is before you can make this jump, this rise, right? You have to let go of anything that is going to weigh you down from being able to hold this experience, right? That's another part of the energy clash stage. I like to think about it or describe it as a purifying process or a refining process, right? We're getting rid of those things that don't quite align. Now, when you're in this phase and you watch general conference, it can be experienced as like basically you're getting constantly poked in all these open wounds that you have all over your body. And the divine departure is the thing that first kind of made you aware of all these different wounds that you have going on. And so every time that that gets poked, we have this natural inclination to blame whoever is doing the poking and saying, don't you understand? You are hurting people, right? That hurts. Quit poking them, right? If you don't have a wound here, though, or you heal that wound, the same poke can happen and you can go like, seriously, why are you poking? but it doesn't have the same visceral life and death feeling to it, right? That's the difference there. We're not saying it's great to go around and poke people. We're saying there's a purpose in the poke. The poke is letting us know where our wounds are based on our reactions, right? You should be able to sit and watch something and not get triggered by it if you are in a whole state or a phase that has more healing and less trauma in it. When you're in the middle of processing a lot of trauma, doing a lot of healing, it becomes almost unbearable because you have that many attacks coming at you, and it's really hard to sit and process and deal with all of them, right? So that's where I talk about this more in my coaching and the work that I do individually with clients, but trying to navigate what does that look like in doing your healing and re-engaging in these different activities and places, right? That's kind of how you can gauge where you are in your own journey and process. Is what is your experience? Is it that visceral one, or is it just like, yeah, that's annoying, quit poking, right? That's the difference we're looking for. So depending upon, again, which of these different stages you are in and the amount of active trauma you currently have that is being brought up. The reason it gets brought up and we get triggered is because it's ready to be healed. We're ready to enter a new phase here, right? But we can't do that if we don't know what our trauma is and learn how to heal it, okay? So they're important things, but both of those will contribute to how you experience the different words that are said, the different topics that are approached, right? How they're brought about. My goal is to give you kind of an overview perspective, assuming if you, well, we might break it down into different stages, but yeah, overview is what we're going to be looking at. Your experience might be different, totally valid based on your stages and phase that you are in. My goal is to just give you some perspectives and insights that might help make it easier for you to see the good that was coming out of this session and why I got so excited when I listened to it. So with that, I think we've covered all of the prep work. We can finally start diving into the specific talks and things that we're sharing. The first one we're going to start off was the introductory message given by Elder Oaks. Okay. We're going to break through a few of the different lines that were said here, and I'm going to share with you why that stood out to me, what I saw in it as important, valuable, how it contributes to this conversation. Okay. So the first one that we're going to talk about is he says, this evening we add to that history as we embark upon a new purpose and procedure for the foreseeable future. He's talking about how the history of the different audiences has changed and we're doing something new this time. He specifically says here, we are adding to this history. There's a new purpose and procedure, right? What has changed? Why do we have a new purpose? Why do we have a new procedure that's occurring? Okay. To me, this is very indicative of language that says, hey, we have entered a new stage of relationship. So we need to adjust our purpose and our procedure in order to start matching that. And the fact that he says for the foreseeable future is also a great reference of we see this continuing, right? This is where we're going. This is what we're heading for. So that's one thing. Another thing that was great out of this is actually a direct response to a lot of that conversation down here, right? That was happening with women in the church around, are we getting rid of women's sessions? Are we having our own special session, right? Because a big part of that conversation was, we don't like feeling like, okay, here's all the women, we're going to put you aside in this special little group and there you go, you get to have this session, right? That kind of patronizing feeling. But then at the same time, feeling like, we don't get rid of it. This is where we actually had feminine speakers and leaders and like actual things. And we loved our traditions and our connections that we would do with each other, right? So there was a little bit of this energy clash that's been going on the past couple of years as we're trying to navigate, okay, what does this session look like? How do we best utilize it in a way for things moving forward? Okay. So this statement here, I also see as recognizing this direct overall conversation that's been happening, which basically is, hey, we know that this session has been important to you. You've had lots of thoughts and concerns about why we're having it, how it is run. We've been trying to figure that out, right? So that's part of this statement here. Bubble up versus trickle down. Richard I talked about this on the Faith Matters process. Exactly, right? None of these concepts that I teach are new, right? I didn't come up with them. I didn't create them. What I created was a way to describe the interactions with each other, right? These ideas are woven throughout our entire human history. And that's what makes the model so powerful, is because it's a tool to take all of those things together and see, oh, how does these concepts and ideas work with one another? Okay? So he then goes on, and one of the statements he says is, for now, this Saturday evening meeting is a session of general conference, not a session of any organization. Now, again, depending upon your stage and your phase, that could be a little bit triggering of a statement to have. Here's why I got really excited about it, because one thing in particular, the first was saying this is a session of general conference and not a session of any specific organization is huge in legitimizing the things that were said within it. It's basically saying, hey, anything we say here applies to the entire church, which also then applies to the entire world. This does not apply just to women, right? This is important stuff that we are discussing, that we are talking about. Legitimizes the conversations that are happening. It also adds to the official stature of this, of saying, this isn't just a Relief Society thing, right? This is an official thing. It's important. It matters. Okay? The second piece of that is, again, coming back to that direct conversation with women and saying, hey, we want to increase this balance of feeling like you as women are equal and have as much power and authority and are starting to move forward and progress in that. And again, as we look here, it starts out itty bitty little baby, right? And that can feel like, oh my gosh, seriously? You think you should get credit for this, right? But the purpose and point of taking note of seemingly small and insignificant things is because that's what gives our brain and bodies the ability to trust and be like, oh, wait, things are shifting, things are progressing. I need to hold this space, right? If the feminine doesn't take note of these early on pieces, she's far more likely to pimple because she's like, support's not showing up. And support's just like, wait, hold on, we're coming. Give us a chance, right? So that's another piece of the statement here. He then goes on and says, like all sessions of general conference, the planning, speakers, and music are designated by the First Presidency. Again, this could be something that was very triggering, coming into it from the context of like, we have a bunch of women who have been troublesome, so we need to get together and figure out what is the message we're going to tell them to get them all back in line, right? That is not how I see this. First and foremost, it's important to note that while it's my understanding the First Presidency does assign who will be speaking, they do not assign what they will be speaking on. The individual speaker gets to choose their topics, write their talk. The talk then does have to go through an approval process, so they don't get to just say whatever they want, it has to get approved. But that shows this cool thing that if you see patterns in themes and things that are showing up in general conference, it's not because the First Presidency sat down and said, hey, this is the theme that we need to have for this week. It's because individual people felt inspired to speak on those topics or felt it was important to them, right? So that's one piece to take in note. The second piece that's cool is these talks get approved, right? So we're going to talk about that a little bit more, why that's significant and why that matters. How does something like the September 6th factor into this? That's what I'm afraid will happen. Yes. Okay. So this is another thing, right? That is really important to note. We hear all the time about the importance of God's timing, right? What is okay in one time is not okay in another time. This has to do with what stage we are in, right? If we are not ready for the rise and we're trying to move into the rise, when we haven't even really started the divine departure in a lot of ways, right? And it's not time to move forward here, that's going to be a key piece of it, right? And that's part of the masculine relationship there that's going on, is navigating which phase are we in, what are we ready for. Now, an important thing I didn't talk about earlier when we were talking about the model is recognizing this is fractal in nature. And what I mean by that is to think about like Russian nesting dolls, that there are smaller dolls and there are bigger and bigger dolls, okay? And so it's like we have lots of different versions of this going on at a time. Some of them are smaller on more individual levels. Some of them are bigger on like the collective level. And one of the things that's important to recognize is the organization of the church itself has lots and lots of different relationships. The relationship between the organization and the membership is only one of those relationships. Some of those other relationships are also the organization with governments, the organization with other Christian churches, the organization with other religions who are not Christian, right? There's lots of those other pieces. So part of that is saying, okay, we need all of these other relationships to be in the right spot before we start shifting into some of these other things, right? So maybe it appears like we're hanging out here in the membership part for a long time. And it's like, oh my gosh, can we please move forward, right? We're here in one of these two stages. Eventually there comes a time where all those other relationships or other models start moving into alignment so that this one gets its turn and we can move forward, right? So that's another key piece to be keeping in mind is we don't always, and I say this with my clients too, right? This is not a prescriptive thing where you can sit there and go like, okay, I'm going to write out all the different relationships and where each one is at. And so where it needs to move forward and how that works, right? That is a part of God's role. God is the one who is saying, I know all the different pieces. I know all the parts that need to come together at one time or another. Here's what that looks like. I will guide you through it. Our job is learning what does that process and that relationship look like. Right? On an individual level, I use our bodies and our emotions to let us know, hey, what trauma is ready to be healed, right? So I might be working with somebody and they're like, hey, I really want to have this goal of being able to be closer to my husband, right? I'm like, great, let's start talking about that. And as we're talking about that, some random thing comes up about their childhood. And then another random thing comes up about their home or giving birth to a child, right? We go on this crazy tangent all over the place, but those were all little pieces that needed to be cleaned up in order to help smooth out this process between where she was in her relationship with her husband and where she wanted to be, right? So I don't always know what are those random pieces that are going to come up. I know how to read when those things come up. How do we move forward through that, right? That's what our goal is, our job is. Family handshake, how do men receive this? I'm not quite sure on your question, receive what? What are you referring to? Happy to answer it. Feel free to just expand a little bit more. But we're going to jump back for a second in recognizing why I feel like things have shifted from where they used to be in the past, like concerns with the September 6th, and where I feel like they are now. Okay. And a big part of this is because of a lot of the wording and phrasing that shifted in this. How do men get my model? Like, where do they fall into it or how do they understand it? Sorry, still need more clarity. Because this session really felt groundbreaking to me of saying, how do we move forward? Okay, what is September 6th? Oh, right. So this, okay. How do men receive your model and what is September 6th, right? How do they know which phase we're in and when to say like, oh, that's okay. Oh, that's not okay, right? Okay, I feel like that's your question. I feel like I understand it now. If that's your question, what you're trying to get at, a piece of that comes down to each of us having our own personal connection and relationship with God based upon our roles and responsibilities and doing our best to navigate those, right? Now, of course, this leaves room for human error, which is a conversation we can dive into at another time. But ideally, in this beautifully orchestrated experience, each one of us is focused on what we feel like we're supposed to be doing, what is correct right now, and God then directing each one of us in how to go about doing that. Getting into this is a little more detailed. Maybe I'll make a whole separate video on it, but the idea is God is basically saying, not right now. But at the same time is also telling people, I need you laying a foundation for this because there's gonna come a time in the future where this is going to be ready and I need some of that groundwork being laid, right? And groundwork is always being laid until the shift happens, right? And so that's an important piece to recognize as well. Now, we in our humanness do not always know how to balance those two things, right? This comes down to the inherent nature of the energy clash and how we tend to view those as polarities when God says one thing to this person and God says somebody else to this person. And that's where we can get some of that clashing occurring. understanding how to navigate through the energy clash, how to have each of us fulfilling our roles and responsibilities that God is directing us to, that's how we learn how to move more smoothly through this process. But that's a new experience and one that would take more than the scope of this video to go into. But hopefully that helps you understand a little bit more of where they come from, where we come from, and why it's important to notice these shifts happening. So the next thing that I wanted to highlight in Elder Oaks's talk or introductory thing is he then acknowledges that President Jean B. Bingham, the general president of the Relief Society, is to conduct this session, which again can feel like, really, she can conduct, but she can't preside, or why do you have to make a special note of this, or is that really such a big deal, or this is great, but it's not enough, right? Again, it can feel like peanuts or feel like appeasement, again, depending upon what stage and phase you are in, how you're going to be experiencing this. But why I found this significant was, again, twofold. One, here we have another evidence of direct responses, right? We have these conversations that have been taking place, which is we would like women to have more representation, have more conversation, have more leadership roles being given to them. And they said, okay, what are some of the ways we can explore doing that? And one of the first ones I stepped into here was, let's have her conduct a session, right? That was a huge shift to have happen. Again, we want to take note of these small shifts that are happening because it gives us the momentum and trust to stay in these phases as that change is slowly starting to occur, right? The major external changes, okay, I'm gonna do another shift on the model real quick. Okay, so another way to think about this is the blue represents the internal, right? Us as people, our thoughts and ideas, opinions, beliefs, that sort of thing. The gold represents the external changes that occur and take place. Okay? You'll notice here, it's easiest if the internal changes take place first, and then external change happens. Now, I did another video where I walked through this bigger version and the Heavenly Mother journey and where I felt like we were. Now, a piece of this is recognizing, if we're actually going back to the September 6th incident, which for those of you who don't know, from my understanding, I think it was like 6 individuals who were basically excommunicated for a relationship with Heavenly Mother and the things they were talking about and how they went about that. Again, there's a whole nother conversation to have going into that and around excommunication and how you have a relationship with the church and the relationship of each people. We're not going to dive into that right now. But the point I want to highlight is that was actually probably more of this energy clash back here, right? Where we're starting to have that internal connection occur. And it's like, great, this needs to happen and shift, but we are not yet ready for external shifts to be happening yet. Okay, which this is the period that I feel like we have been in, is this energy clash now. And part of the reason why I feel like that is because what happened here? The external shifted in this general conference, right? It may seem like nothing, but again, it starts out very small. Even here, we're not at the full-blown feminine experience. It's just starting to shift. But Heavenly Mother was directly mentioned and talked about in a session of general conference that is broadcasted throughout the entire world, right? There are members in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, who haven't even known that we have the doctrine of Heavenly Mother. And it was just brought up, right? That is huge. That is significant. That is shifting here in the external masculine piece of things, right? Which shows us, hey, we're getting close to this phase here, right? That's also part of the problem too. When we get in this first energy clash and we don't quite understand that it's about building that internal connection, laying the ground for others moving forward. And we try to jump too quickly to the end here, and we want this piece to be happening next here. That is usually the time when the church is saying, not yet, right? Not yet, hang on, right? And that can be experienced as, again, this period here looks a lot like an energy clash. Nothing has changed. Things are still bad. They're not going forward. We're not progressing. We don't even often notice this new set point that happens because it's an internal one. And you'll notice the masculine has not changed, right? Not at all. It just barely starts going on this journey here and shifting into things when we get to this space, right? So that's another thing to keep in mind with this. So the fact that, going back to Elder Oak's talk, when he said that President Bingham was going to be conducting this session and that this session was just another regular session of conference, not a specific women's one, not one that is pertaining to any specific organization, that was a key thing too. Because if this was a women's session or a Relief Society session and she was conducting, it's like, well, yeah, this is her organization and that's what she's doing. What was basically said is she is on the level if she's able to conduct a general session of conference. I know there's some of you rolling your eyes being like, but it was still the women's session. Why couldn't it have been Saturday? Why couldn't it have been Sunday? Do we really have to go at this pace, right? I hear you, but I want to point out these things for you to give you that understanding that sometimes the feminine has this like expansive excitement, right? And again, the masculine is just like, my job is not to move, not to move. And so when it starts going on this journey of moving, it's like, baby, barely moving, right? And our job is to understand that. Dalietta, great question. Where is this model from? Thank you for the visual aid. This model is actually the piece that I created. So I took a lot of my different backgrounds and trainings and various things I'd learned and studied, and it all just kind of came together. I actually woke up one morning from just sleeping, and I had been coaching a group that I was working with and teaching them some of these things. And this visual just popped into my mind, which was this base model right here, this image. And when I saw it, I was like, oh my gosh, that's what I was teaching last night. That is the best way to describe it. And so I started playing with it some more, and I've expanded it and developed it. So this model is my creation. So I'm glad you're enjoying it, and I appreciate you acknowledging that. But again, back to the masculine, right? The role of the masculine is sitting here thinking, my job is not to move. So and again, when I say he, referring to whoever is in the role of the masculine energy, which in this case would be the church leadership, right? Their job is they tend to go very slowly in pieces, right? We got to get that momentum building yet. And momentum isn't it's not always the same, right? It usually starts out really small, right? Like it may take some effort to push the car to the edge of the hill, but once it goes off the hill to a certain point, right, it just gains speed and goes really quickly down, right? That's the similar thing here, that in the beginning, we're still like pushing the car right into the tipping point of going over, and it's like, it's hardly moved, nothing is happening, but get ready, because what model tells us is that it will continue moving forward. So that was actually a big thing, that she was conducting this, and that this was stated as being a basic general form of general conference and not an official like Relief Society women's conference. Okay? Moving forward. So then he says, tonight, the Saturday evening session of general conference will concentrate on the concerns of Latter-day Saint women. This was super cool that it was pointed out like this. Again, if your state and your phase are in a space, that can feel really inflammatory of like, you don't need to control the women, right? They're not acting out. You don't need to sit them all down and tell them what they're doing wrong and how they should be doing it right, right? That's where it can come across. And part of that comes from, again, going back to some of the trauma that can come from these past experiences, right? On both sides of the relationship, both people are like, in the past, things weren't quite great, and we're not quite sure, like, we don't have this same context and clarity to describe that, right? But there's this lack of trust going on, right? And so there's this perspective from the masculine of like, you're going to try and rise too quickly and it's not time yet. And so we don't know that we can trust you yet. And there's this perspective from the feminine of like, you just always put us in our place. You never let us do anything we want, right? And so that's a little bit of that conversation that's going on. And that is why it's actually valuable for us to acknowledge that and process that and be like, this hurts, this sucks, because we need to heal that experience and say like, yeah, it was messy while we were trying to navigate some of those things. And that influences our ability to understand that we're now in this phase experience, right? Because again, if we're holding on to some of that past trauma will always, it's meant to be triggered in the energy clash cycle in order to give us the ability to step into the rise and hold it well, right? Without acknowledging that, without healing some of that on both parties, right? It becomes difficult for us to move into that risen stage. And the risen stage is foundationally built on trust, right? So it's a really important piece. So going back to his comment here, tonight, the Saturday evening session of General Conference will concentrate on the concerns of Latter-day Saint women. That is going back to this overall conversation that's being had. And it's basically directly saying, hey, we know you've had lots of concerns going on here. We want to talk about that. And the fact that they are saying it's time for us to engage with one another, that gives us another key clue of what is happening. Because engagement between the masculine and feminine is one of the key hallmarks of the energy clash stage. The masculine's job here is to sort of like test the feminine, to say, hey, are you ready for the rise? Are you ready for the rise? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? Are you capable of doing this? Do you know this? Are you aware of this? Right? And even in like a relationship between like a spouse, husband and wife, right? And again, they can take turns being in these different roles. That can feel really frustrating because it's like, do you not trust me to be able to do this? And it's not about lack of trust. It's actually about preparing the ground to be able to trust more. Right? Now, this experience can range because every stage can be experienced through a different phase. Right? We talked a little bit about those in the beginning. If you joined us late, go back to the beginning of the video and watch. But in essence, in some phases, the energy clash is very much argumentative and against each other and battling, right? Those are the most traumatic experiences and usually make it difficult for us to rise in the future, right? It can also be experienced as more of a cooperative collaboration, and we're working on this together and everything in between, right? That's the experience that we're having here. And basically, this was an acknowledgement of, hey, we've been in the energy clash stage. And what tends to happen is the masculine is coming down, offering their hand here, grabbing the feminine. And what happens is we want the flip to occur and take place, right? But what it can be perceived as, the feminine is like, oh, the masculine's coming down on me, get away, right? I don't want this. No, that hurts. Or they'll be like, I'm in charge, right? And they try and like pull the masculine down. That's part of where the masculine can get their hesitancy of like, how is she going to react? I'm not quite sure, right? Depending on past trauma. Same thing with the feminine. She's like, is he coming down to stifle me? Do I need to step up on top of him? I'm not going to be, right? Those are the different views that happen. But the goal is we're meant to come together, grab hands and flip, right? That's what we want. That's how we get into the rise. So engagement is critical here, and flat out spelling out this session of conference is for the purpose of engaging with the women of the church. That's huge. Okay, that's a good thing. Then the next line makes me even more excited because it says, this will include the doctrine of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Okay, I noticed the doctrine of the Church of Jesus Christ is mentioned multiple times throughout this talk and various other ones. And I think a piece of it is actually referring to Heavenly Mother, right? Because again, early on, we're just like, where are the places we're not quite sure yet? Let me back up. I need to share something with you before this will make sense. So part of this phase here, when we are starting to shift things in the external and that change is happening and we have the split in the energy again, is the masculine is trying to figure out, what does it look like to actually do these things in the real world, right? How do we integrate these new internal shifts and changes that have been happening, right? Where does that start to come from? What does that look like? And the masculine, again, is very much like, we don't move, we don't do it until we feel certain. That's part of the role of masculine energy. It's very purposeful and useful. We want that. Again, going back to our bow and arrow. If you have a flimsy bow and then this stretchable string, your bow is not going to be very effective. We want the differences there. It's important. We just don't always know how to navigate and make the best use of those without traumatizing each other and creating patterns of not trusting each other. And then it makes it hard to move through this process even more. Okay. So that's part of the focus I want to say here is the masculine is still trying to figure out, what do we say? When do we say it? How do we say it? What do we do all this? Right. And Elder Oak's introduction was basically, we need to say some things. We're not quite sure how to say all of them yet. So here's what we're going to say. And perhaps a better way to say that actually is remembering that the church, again, has this stewardship and responsibility of all of these different types of relationships with people who are in all these different phases, right? And they're supposed to be communicating a singular message that is going to fit everybody, no matter what stage they're in, right? So being able to take this information and say, okay, how can we say it to people who are like not even on this journey, or people who are like, I'm just trying to like not die in my homeland country or get food on the table for my family, right? Those are really important responsibilities of the church. And at the same time, not wanting to look like those things don't matter, right? I'm not, again, trying to say what the church is or isn't thinking, just looking at these different patterns. What are the different perspectives and ways this could be approached at? And so one of these is acknowledging we've got to speak to a wide range of people in different stages and different phases. And we're in different stages and different phases, and we don't have all the clarity on it, but we know this conversation and engagement needs to be happening. How can we best go about doing this, right? And this is what we got so far. So when he says here, this will include the doctrine of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. To me, a piece of that was saying, this will include Heavenly Mother, which we see happen in Elder Runland's talk later. And there's a couple more instances where he mentions that, where I think we can see that's more of a specific response, and why I think it's referring to Heavenly Mother and not just like a blanket statement about the doctrine of Jesus Christ. Because early in the talk, he does mention like the gospel doesn't change, the doctrine doesn't change, but how we hold our meetings do change. I don't feel like that one was necessarily talking about Heavenly Mother, but we'll get to in a second why I feel like this reference and another reference were. Before we get there, I want to touch on one other line he says here. We have included some priesthood leaders who preside over the participating organizations. Again, this is a place where I know a lot of people got eye rolls of like, why does there have to be a man presiding in front of the women, right? It creates, again, that feeling of, do you not trust me, right? I should be okay here. And there's a couple of different perspectives we can take on this. One is, this is the current structure and format of God's church, right? Is there room for things to shift and change in the future? Potentially. What does that, well, not potentially, absolutely. We know that women have the priesthood in the temple. We know that there's the familial priesthood that originated back in biblical times before we got the hierarchical priesthood, which is the priesthood that we currently practice, right? So there's different resources here and how that's evolving and how that's shifting. I've done a whole other video before talking about priesthood power and the difference between masculine leadership and feminine leadership and how that can influence our understanding of priesthood power and authority between men and women and the different roles and responsibilities. It's a really cool video. If you haven't checked it out, don't remember what it's called. I think it's just priesthood power. If you want, send me a DM. I'll find the link and send it to you. But that's like whole separate thing. The thing I want to point out here is that, again, this was actually a hallmark of saying, this is not some like backhanded lower level conversation that's happening. This is official front and center conversation, right? Which just gives more weight and meaning to what is happening. So that's actually a good thing there. So then we continue on, and he says, what we are initiating here is responsive to the communication resources currently available to the Lord's worldwide church leadership and membership. Sorry, I'm trying to read the notes on the back of my screen. That was super cool, because what I saw here is what we are initiating is response to the communication resources currently available to church-wide leadership and membership. A couple of different things that I hear in that. One is what are these communication resources? And it's, again, that information between the leadership and the membership. So if we look back at the system level conversations, what are some of those things? Well, some of it could be direct letters being sent to the leadership and saying, hey, I'm sharing my thoughts, I'm sharing my experiences, here are my concerns, this is what I would like you to address. But it could also be things on social media, our conversations and discussions, right? That is where a lot of these lower level conversations take place that contribute to the overall ones. So they're basically saying here, this is a response to the lower level conversations that are happening. We're bringing the conversation into the overall level. That's a cool thing. That's a good thing. And here's what's even better is the next line says, the doctrine of the gospel of Jesus Christ is for everyone. And that is our principal motive and extent of dissemination. What I heard in that was, this is where I think it could be taken as potentially a reference to Heavenly Mother, because the gospel of Jesus Christ is for everyone, right? It's basically saying, hey, we know we've been getting a lot of letters. We know there's a lot of you talking about this on social media and different things, concerned about Heavenly Mother. Yeah, this is important. That applies to everyone. And our main motive here right now is to recognize that, but also make sure we stay focused on having Christ still be the main focus, and she plays into that as a part of it. But also, this is not the space where we explore some of those other spheres, right? It's basically setting up, trying to find the best way to describe this, of saying our focus right now is on Christ and what we do know about her, right? And it's so funny because when I say that, right, there's a lot of us Heavenly Mother seekers who go, we know so much, right? But the main piece is saying the Gospel Topics essay is what we trust you with right now. Can we start there, right? That's basically the shift that happened, right? Is they're saying, okay, we know there's a lot. We know there's places we want to go with this. There's things we need to go with this. But right now, let's start with what we have and start our conversation there, which is on the Gospel Topics essay. So basically saying our motive and focus is first and foremost on Christ and bringing people to him, because if we bring people to Christ, Christ brings people to his parents, right? That happens. But that's the stewardship that they've been given. Their responsibility is to bring people first to Christ. But then also saying our focus here is on the things that we do know, right? This is not the place for exploring bigger, broader things yet, right? Eventually it may become. It's basically, again, coming back and saying, let's start with what we have and then build and grow from there, okay? And again, this is reiterated by the next sentence saying, we honor the daughters of God in this special session by concentrating on their concerns, which is, again, another reason why I feel like the doctrine of gospel of Jesus Christ could be referring to Heavenly Mother, because that's a really big concern for a lot of the women. And okay, so then here's another piece. This paragraph here, second to last paragraph, kind of random if you read it on your own and aren't aware of some of the things that have been going on. It states, we are grateful that broadcast technology now gives church leaders the capacity to conduct detailed training by addressing specific audiences in the field. We also welcome the fact that current travel opportunities are increasing. That allows us to send church leaders to conduct needed regular face-to-face leadership training in the field. Right? Kind of random. What does this have to do with? Well, if we look at the paragraph beforehand, which was basically saying, hey, this is a response to the conversation that's been happening through a letter sent to the church, social media conversations, different Heavenly Mother accounts, right? That type of thing. Kind of makes sense. This could potentially be a reference to some of those trainings that were being held about Heavenly Mother. Okay? Now, here's part of the good news about this, right? Some people, when I make that reference, it's like, well, that's a bad thing. And this all sounds very contradictory. Weren't those trainings talking about, here's the specifics of what we can and can't talk about Heavenly Mother, and basically cracking down on what we should and shouldn't be talking about? If we go back and look at some of the most closely to the first source resources available, which there are not a lot, right? The messages being shared there were nothing really new. It was basically saying, we don't pray to her. We need to focus on Jesus Christ. I forgot to grab them before I hopped on here, so I feel bad. If you want to know the specifics, send me a message. I can pull them up and let you know. But in essence, it wasn't anything new. It was basically saying, focus on what we have in the gospel topics essay. If people are wanting to talk about more, say not yet, not right now. This is what we're going to focus on. This is what we're going to talk about. Okay. So that is one piece of this, is recognizing that, again, it's kind of having this conversation of like, hey, we know a lot of you are kind of concerned about these trainings that were happening. We're acknowledging those, but we're also letting you know part of what we do is have this engagement in training of what needs to happen and when. Now, the really cool thing is to see what has happened as a result of this, right? And this is, again, why it's important to understand what this early stage looks like, how it can mirror the energy clash stage and feel like nothing has changed, right? Because while there are people who were already hanging out in this phase, a rise always brings with it an opportunity for new awakening to occur, because the energy has shifted enough that we can start pulling new people into that divine departure stage and progressing forward, right? Until the previous divine departure group makes it into the rise stage, a new one can't be pulled forward. Otherwise, we lose that grounding space that we had. But once we rise, that creates the energy momentum for the next group to start moving forward, which is what we saw happen, right? There were lots of women from various people and resources and things I've seen, right? Again, this is opinion, this is hearsay, this is second nature, take it for what you want. But there were lots of people who viewed this session of General Conference as being like, hey, we talked about Heavenly Mother. They talked about the essay on Heavenly Mother. I guess it's important. I guess we should be studying that. I wonder what's in it. I've never read it. I don't even know that it existed. Really? It existed, right? That type of thing, that is the next wave of awakening. And basically this leadership training, I can see as it being preparatory of saying, hey, you're going to have more people who are going to start having this interest in understanding the doctrine of Heavenly Mother, what it looks like, how we talk about it, how do we navigate it through it. We're going to give you a little bit of prep work foundation of what we can do right now in order to make way for this shift that's going to be happening. And the cool thing is, it's already opening up the doors for so many conversations happening. I know of multiple firesides throughout the continental United States that are taking place on specifically looking at what is in the essay on Heavenly Mother, right? What should we be learning from it? What is this doctrine, right? I have heard stories of different stake presidents and bishops who are interacting with the different women in their church, and they're saying, okay, what do we need to know, right? Why is this important to us? How do we go about helping integrate this important doctrine into the way we are running the church in our local area, right? It is being seen as this official statement from the official church leadership saying, this is important, it is sanctioned, start talking about it, start studying it. We need to start implementing this on more of that local level field so that once we get the base ground ready, we can start going somewhere new, right? But until we can build the foundation off of what we already have, we're not ready for that next phase yet, okay? So that was one of the things I was super excited about and I thought was super interesting here. It also kind of represents, to me, it was speaking that we are going to have future regular face-to-face leadership training in the field, which means this was not a one and done thing. It means this is what we did now. And as we progress and to the degree that we move things forward, we're going to be doing more. And those more are going to be good, right? Piece of this is, again, rebuilding that trust, recognizing where we are, learning to see these different signs. But again, the factor that there's a lot of this stuff that is actually happening verbally in General Conference, that is the biggest indicator to me that we are here in these two phases and not back here in these two phases, and why things are shifting and different, right? Because this is where the external starts to shift. We're back here, external doesn't change. Okay. Let's see. What else was the next thing I wanted to share with you? Okay, so the next thing that he says here is, this is the work of the Lord Jesus Christ. We are his servants directed by his Holy Spirit. This was a beautiful thing too here, because to me, it reiterated, this is the work of Jesus Christ, right? Meaning we're not in charge of this. Jesus Christ and our heavenly parents are in charge of this, and they are very much very aware of what you are feeling, and I am feeling, and they are feeling, and the bishop over there, and this stake president, and all these random people are feeling. They're aware of it. They're orchestrating. They're navigating it. We're progressing through. Okay. A couple of comments came in here. Oh, Emily, my heart is singing. I feel so strongly you are onto truth. I'm so glad to hear that, Ashley. This just spoke to me. Like, I got super emotional as I was listening to this session, because I was like, holy crap, it's happening. And that's what I want to share with each of you, is giving you some glimmers of hope, helping you recognize these early signs that seem insignificant, but being like, look, it's preparing the way. It is leading the way. And not only that, the shifts are literally happening. Right? Okay, next thing. Can we assume they intend to allow us to talk about the doctrine of her and not intend to curtail a doctrinal drift or focus on her? Yes. So here's a cool thing that is important about this. I am friends with a lot of other Heavenly Mother content creators, and we have conversations and discussions, and the same way that I do with my other business friends and things. And when the training rumors first came out, there was a lot of like, can we like be sharing this? Can we be talking about this? I'm not quite sure what's going on here. Like, I don't even really know, right? A piece of what happened and took place was that refining process. And basically what happened is a lot of them were like, okay, you only want us to focus on the gospel topic essay. We will only focus on the gospel topic essay. Another piece of that was saying, okay, what are the things we can focus on? You want to make sure we're still focusing on Jesus Christ? Got it. You want us to focus on the eternal natures of families? Got it, right? It was refining this piece and saying, yes, you can trust us, right? Because in the past, from the masculine perspective, there was very much this feeling of like, okay, women, you go and find Heavenly Mother and like you replace her, right? You become so obsessed with her and like you're forgetting about Jesus Christ. We need that reassurance that Christ and Heavenly Father still matter to you, are still important, right? And from the feminine perspective, the masculine need for reassurance, which is a critical point in navigating the rise in the energy clash. I talk about this actually in my general conference guide. If you didn't download it, there's so many awesome resources in that. You can find the link in my bio, but I walk through like how you have a conversation where the masculine basically needs continual reassurance. That's how the masculine learns to trust so that we can move forward into rise. On the flip side, the feminine needs validation. That is what she's looking for. And so how we can navigate that validation and reassurance becomes a really beautiful process there. And so basically the masculine was basically wanting reassurance. These things are still important to you. And what happened was on these communication resources currently available to the Lord's Worldwide Church, the conversation that was being had was, here's the gospel topics essay. Here's what leaders have said. Here is how it relates to Christ. Here's how we can focus more on Christ. Here's how we can focus on the eternal natures of families. And that said to the masculine, okay, you're ready. We can trust you. You can flip. We'll come down. We're willing to grab your hand. We're going to make the flip. Let's start talking about the gospel topics essay and go from there. That was a beautiful thing that happened. There was so much conversation I was sharing with my friends during this point and saying, don't get caught up in the fact that they are asking for this. This is a good sign, and how we respond is going to be critical in how we move forward, because we either repaint ourselves as saying like, no, I'm still coming in and being like, nope, I'm not ready for this, or get out of my way. I deserve this. Why are you holding it back from me? If we come from either of those two attitudes, flip's not going to happen. Rise isn't going to be sustainable. We're going to get stuck back cycling, and we're going to have to go through the energy clash longer. If we can acknowledge what's going on here, how to respond appropriately, though, that is how we create the momentum for things to progress and move forward. So that's kind of my thoughts there on Yes, in terms of the things in the essay, great, right? In terms of anything beyond that, they're not ready for that, right? This whole conversation, what I saw here was, let's start with this. This is what we trust you on. Let's find our common ground and work from there. That's not to say we're not going to go further places. It's not to say we're not going to be ready for those, right? Where is this version, right? Many cycles of this process that we go through in order to get from one original set point to a new one, right? So if this set point is her fully expressed and seen and recognized in all areas of the gospel and our manuals and everything, right? Changes in the temple, all of those things, there's a lot of little things to get there. But we're moving and it's going well. And the more we become aware of the process and what that looks like, the easier it's going to be for us to continue to go through and trust that things are unfolding and happening well. So we made it through a significant cycle right now, and we should be celebrating that and acknowledging that and working within that, because the better we do at that, the better it's going to be, because it reestablishes that trust, right? Remember, we need the trust in place. If we can heal ourselves, if we can heal our traumas, if we can practice that reassurance and validation, which in my guide, I also talk about what do you do when the masculine is not giving you that validation, and how hard it is to try and give the reassurance when it's like, I'm not getting it in return, right? Go check that out if you want more info on that. But that's part of why this is so important to understand, because then we're not re-traumatizing each other as we continue to move through the cycles, right? We can be like, oh, okay, I know where they're coming from. I know why this is happening. I see what's occurring here. Breathe for a second, right? That's my goal. Okay, another comment. I would love to hear your perspective on excommunication, because I find it remarkable how many women I know who are wrestling with the fear of excommunication, and I don't interact with big fish. Okay, this is a great one. I may make a whole nother video addressing this topic. There's two important things that I will say here. One is, we kind of talked already about timing matters, right? The other piece of it is understanding how to have that communication with the masculine, right? And the great thing is, it only takes one of us understanding this to shift it for both parties involved. So again, check out the guide to understand some of that. But the third piece of it is, and this is a key thing that a lot of women, I feel like, don't understand, because it has not been seen in our world largely. We are creating this right now. And to me, it is fundamental about why President Nelson has been hammering, it feels like, over the past several years. Women, you have to understand your role in priesthood authority and priesthood power, right? Here's why. A piece of this is, sorry, I have two different thoughts. And I feel like, okay, before we go there, that's one of the things that I do is, anytime I'm talking, I like to feel, how does this feel as the words I'm saying it? And when it feels good, I like to continue sharing. And sometimes I get this like internal hang up of like, wait. And I like to pause for a minute and feel like, should I be talking about this instead? Should I be talking about that? Or if a random thought comes into my mind. So if you're new to my videos, that's a part of what just happened here, which is basically, I want to share one other piece before I dive into this other one. And that piece is, another important part of excommunication is, it's one thing to express your opinions and your thoughts. It's another when you are trying to challenge the church and say, you need to do this differently now, right? That's the key piece, because that again is not recognizing what stage are we in. And part of their role and responsibility is to keep tabs on where we are. So you will see like two therapists who in their private work do things, to help people of various experiences, right? One will come out and say, hey, here's some of the things that I see with my clients who have been in the church and what they struggle with, and some of the changes that could be beneficial moving forward to help with that. Others will come out and say, the church is doing this harm. It's wrong. It's bad. You need to not be doing it. What are you doing, right? It's this attack that's taking place. That difference will often be the difference between one getting excommunicated and the other not, right? It's again about allowing understanding of the different stages moving forward. And that attack is basically saying you don't trust in the different phases and allowing things to progress, and recognizing they're working on trying to figure out how to move through these phases, and that's their role and responsibility. Ours as a membership is different. it is that feminine piece, right? It is to be looking at what's going on. What are the shifts and changes and bringing things to awareness so that they know what to take and what should we be focusing on and what do people need, right? It's kind of like the evolution of a business and a consumer, right? It can get really frustrating for a business when the consumer is like, you need to do X, Y, and Z. Different than saying, hey, I'm a consumer. I love the things that you do. This was really frustrating. I didn't like that feature. It didn't work really well. I would love it if you would create something like this. Could you do something like this? It would support me better, right? That's kind of the difference there. As we move forward and progress more towards Zion in the millennium, I have a whole bunch of thoughts and perspectives around how that might shift even more so that it becomes more of this co-creative experience. But right now we still have kind of that different ownership, and it's basically saying, you know, this is the business side of things and we're focused on the business side of things. You're in the consumer side of things, focus on the consumer side of things. That's one piece of it, right? The other important piece is that I was going to mention before is this is priesthood authority as it relates to, I'm trying to contemplate because we've already been on here for a long time. I don't want to make this video too long, but there's so much good stuff we could cover. And I want to share this with you, but I want to make it significant without making it too shallow. So here's what I'm going to share. Part of an attempt to rise that I feel like was more of a rather than a grasping of hands and like, okay, what do you trust us on? What can we start with? Let's start there. Flip was the ordained women movement. That to me felt very much like women trying to say, hey, we recognize men are here in the church. Women feel like they are here in the church. You keep telling us we are here. We are not because we are not here. And it was an attempt to go from here to here, right? Now, what we don't usually recognize is from an energetics perspective, we're always in relationship with one another. So anytime we're out of whack with ourselves, it's creating this tension and pulling the other one out of whack. And it's really hard for that other party not to fall kilter to that and to hold that centered space. So what tends to happen in most of our relationships is we shift, right? And all it takes is one moving back for the other to be like, or one moving back for the other to be like, oh, there's not so much tension anymore, right? When this is occurring, right? Or even this, right? Both parties are like, it's your fault. You're causing the tension. No, you're causing the tension, right? One shifts and it's like, oh, that's great. Okay? When we had that experience going on, leadership here was trying to hold this position, but they also feel a strain by the again, not speaking for anybody. I'm speaking from an energetics model perspective, okay? Feeling like, this is not right either, right? There is a better situation and we need to progress that. But when they come here, they resist that because they go, oh, this does not feel right. You're not meant to be usurping this power and authority. We're not meant to be the same. We're supposed to preserve that polarity, right? Polarity is a really, really important concept in energetics in all of this. We talked about it a little bit earlier with the bow and arrow and different things, right? And so the idea is, women, you need to understand your role in priesthood power and authority. It is here. It is at the same level, right? But so long as you are trying to do this, we're going to resist. Once you identify this and you start embodying this, well, then maybe there might be room for flexibility, right? The energetic pattern tells us we all have masculine and feminine energies within us. We need to balance them. We can both utilize each of them. Does that create then room for it to be like, one day we can have women who have priesthood power and authority in the same administrative ways that men do? Potentially, it's there in the model, right? God gets to dictate how that unfolds and how it happens. But what I can tell you is that will not happen so long as we have this going on or this going on. The first step that needs to happen is this, okay? I talk more about this in my priesthood power video, again, talking about what does women in leadership look like? It's wisdom, it's intuition. What does masculine leadership look like? It is action, it is direction. There's a difference between them. We need both, and there's actually a really beautiful cycle about how they work together in functioning, and that's the big key piece here. So hopefully that starts to answer a little bit of that. There are several more talks, obviously, in this session that we could dive into. I'm not going to go into all of them right now. I am working on a resource for you that is going to be some version of me potentially doing a chat like this or live where we go through one of the general conference talks probably every month, maybe twice a month. And I'll give you this perspective, right? And I'll lay it out for you and be like, here's what I'm seeing. Here's how I understand this. Here's how I think about it. But I do want to leave you with what was said in the video and in Susan Porter's talk, because there are some really key, beautiful things said there. But before I do that, I need to plug my phone in here because I don't want it to die on us. And I need a different stand. Susan Porter's talk was amazing. And it's actually a perfect time because she basically talks about and describes what it means to be in the risen feminine energy, how to hold that, and the importance of it. If you look at just the headings that she picks for her talk, she basically outlines how I would teach it if I was teaching some basic understanding of risen feminine energy. So her headings are past and present circumstances do not determine our future. When I heard that, I was like, oh, holy crap, she's basically saying, remember the experiences we had back here? Yeah, they don't determine what's happening up here. Please remember that. Let it go. Let this be its own new thing, okay? Don't get so freaked out about it. The second one that she says is the powers within us. And she specifically quotes a verse in Doctrine and Covenants that says, be anxiously engaged in a good cause and do many things of their own free will, bring to pass much righteousness. The power is in them. And she emphasizes in the written version of the talk, the power is in them. I loved this because she basically described the Heavenly Mother experience for those who are right now in that risen state experience. Be anxiously engaged in a good cause. Do many things of your own free will, and you will bring to pass much righteousness. The power is within you, right? She's basically saying, hold that rise, hold it steady. We're adjusting, we're progressing, you're doing beautifully, we're walking through this, keep it going, okay? The third point that she says here is, out of small things proceedeth that which is great. And here's where she talks about the salt, leaven, and light, right? When she's referencing salt, what does she say? Surprising how much of a difference a sprinkling of salt makes, right? So this to me was an encouragement where she was basically saying, hey, I recognize there is a lot of you who are in this energy clash and risen state, and you're like, there's nobody else here in my local area. There's very few of us, right? It can feel like it's few against the many, right? And she's basically saying, you don't need a lot, right? Just a little bit. If enough get into that risen state, it makes way for a new wave to enter the divine departure. That's all we need, right? Keep going. Then when she's talking about leaven, she talks about how bread without a leavening agent in it is dense and heavy and hard, which from an energetics perspective, this is how I describe trauma and wounding that we experience. It's dense, it's heavy, it needs to go through that energy clash stage where we can purify it and remove it, which creates space for the bread to rise and expand, which is directly what she says. She then goes on to say, when we ignite the power of God into our lives, we can replace the spirit of heaviness with inspired perspectives that lift others and make room for hearts to heal, right? She's saying here, again, we've got to do some of this healing work in order for these inspired perspectives to take root or to have that expansion and occurring. But we need some people being that leaven, right? You are that leavening agent. Keep it up, keep doing it. And then she goes on and talks about light, which of course is beautiful, saying you just need the smallest light and it dispels that darkness there. Shine your light, hold your light. It's a beautiful job. And then in the video, let me see if I can pull this up. Okay, so what was really cool in the video is I have often heard throughout my life, right? People prophets, apostles, and they will talk about like, you're a chosen generation. And it's like they say that to every generation. And it's like, yeah, that's true. Every generation, in my opinion, is chosen for their time and has a work and a purpose that they're meant to do. I have never before heard in my lifetime, which is small in comparison to many of you out there. So maybe some of you have more references and examples of this, but a prophet specifically say, this prophecy was referring to you. And in the video, they talk about President Kimball's prophecy about the women of the church. And President Nelson in return says, my dear sisters, you who are vital associates during this winding up scene, the day that President Kimball foresaw is today. This is another reason to me why I say I think we're here instead of back here, because he's basically saying we're in the wind up phases, right? We're moving here. And that prophecy was talking about the ability to be in this risen state, to hold that and create the momentum necessary for things moving forward, which I found was so beautiful. He goes on and says, we need your strength, your conversion, your conviction, your ability to lead, your wisdom, which when I talk about feminine leadership, the risen feminine energy, the hallmark of it is wisdom. It's taking that inner knowing that you received from your own divine connection to God and taking direction and action from that place. Moving forward. Again, more on that in other videos, but that was something I was super excited. And then it's also fun because in some of the like symbols and studies of Heavenly Mother, wisdom is one of those like symbols connecting to her. So it was kind of fun and cool to see all the parallels there. But that was not the main point. He goes on to say, the kingdom of God is not and cannot be complete without women who make sacred covenants and keep them. Women who can speak with the power and authority of a God. Again, remember, it's about stepping into this space, not trying to step over and usurp this space. We need to understand what this space is, right? That is what Risen Feminine is all about. Whatever your calling, whatever your circumstances, we need your impressions, your insights, and your inspiration. We need you to speak up and speak out in word councils. We need each married sister to speak as a contributing and full partner. You have special intuition you have received as gifts from God. We brethren cannot duplicate your unique influence, okay? In other terms, if you're in a different state, in a different phase, that can sound very patronizing and like, yeah, you're so special, right? But in terms of this model, when we recognize the two different relationships, this is basically saying, hey, we have a role, you have a role, we are dependent upon each other moving forward. Please step into your role, step into this space so that we can have that balance and we can reach new heights together. We want it, we know you want it, but it can't happen unless we restore that balance. And that begins with you recognizing your power, your responsibility, your role. What is this counterpart experience here rather than a replacement experience? Right? And then the final piece of it was, I thank you, my dear sisters, and bless you to rise to your full stature, to fulfill the measure of your creation as we walk arm in arm in this sacred work. Together, we will help prepare the world for the second coming of the Lord. That's where it hit me so strongly, right? Anytime they use my language, I'm like, oh, not because it's my language, but because it just speaks to me so purely, right? It may not speak to you the same way, but saying, we bless you to rise. That was just like another confirmation of like, please stay here. Please hold this space. Please let us continue in this journey together. And then the reference of we're walking arm in arm, right? Again, it's a spiral together. We need one another. And then this idea that the whole point and purpose of this is we're working towards preparing for that second coming of the Lord, right? It's amazing, guys. This was one of the most powerful sessions of General Conference I have ever watched. I was blown away for it. And I hope that going through some of these things helps give you that perspective and understanding why it is truly an incredible time to be alive, why this is a wonderful experience, and why there's so much reason to have hope and faith and joy in this process moving forward. Right? This is the best leg I've ever seen. I'm so glad to hear that, Dolly. That touches my heart. This is why I took so much time getting it out. I wanted to respond right away because I know so many of you were struggling and having such difficult times, and I wanted to put this perspective out there. but I wanted to get it right. I wanted to be able to share it with you, take time to gather my notes and my thoughts. And of course, everybody getting sick didn't help, but the spiral staircase in the Manti Temple. Yes, right. Spiral staircases are my favorite thing. In essence, I hope you've enjoyed it. Like I said, I'm going to be going through more of the general conference talks. We're going to continue this conversation. My whole joy and purpose is to share these things with you so that you can step into this role more fully, right? This was not meant to be an advertisement for my program, but as I was talking here, I was like, well, this is exactly what I'm doing. If you want to know about how to embody this more, how to heal your trauma, how to get rid of your triggers, how to learn this language, how to learn this model, how to teach it to others, how to apply it to your life, I have a group program that's going to be starting on Tuesday. There's an application on my website, or you can send me a DM. It's going to be a powerful group because we're going to be learning how to show up in the world, how to see this all the time. This is going to become your lens for how you see the world. And when this is your lens, oh my gosh, the things that become available to you, the abilities you have to change your own life individually, in your family, in your marriage, in your relationship with the church, they utterly transform. So if you're watching this and you're feeling a specific pull of like, okay, this is amazing. How do I do more about this? How do I live more of this? Send me a DM or head over to the application. There's a few spots left. I would love to have you join me. And for those of you who have simply enjoyed watching the video, I hope it's brought some peace and inspiration to you and you've enjoyed it. It was long, so we'll hopefully do some shorter ones in the future. If you made it this far, thank you and have a wonderful rest of the day. Take care. All right.